You know that feeling, right? You get your payslip, you look at the numbers, and you see that chunk of money just gone to tax. And it's hard not to feel the sting. We call it the tax burden, and yeah, it can really feel like one. But what if we've been looking at this whole thing completely backwards? That's really the big question we're digging into today. Is your tax bill just a burden, a cost, or is it something else entirely? Could it be, maybe, the single best subscription service you'll ever sign up for? One that literally protects you from financial ruin? Look, you can see it one of two ways. There's the common view, tax is a burden, it just shrinks your paycheck, end of story. But there's another way to think about it, as a massive national insurance premium. It's a payment into this giant collective pot that creates a safety net for absolutely everyone, including you. So how are we going to figure this out? Well, here's the plan. First, we'll look at the actual pound and pence value your taxes by every year. Then we'll zoom out and run a lifetime financial test to see who really comes out on top. After that, we're going to uncover who's actually funding the system. And finally, we'll talk about the incredible power of this collective pool. Okay, let's get right into it and put a real number on this. What does everyone in the UK, on average, actually get back in public services for all the taxes we pay each year? I think the figure's probably going to surprise you. That number is £15,600 per person per year. That's the average value of everything, from the NHS and schools to the roads we drive on, that each one of us benefits from. You could almost call it the annual subscription fee for living in a civilized society, paid for by that collective pot. So where does all that money go? Well, as you can see here, the biggest piece of the pie, about 30%, goes to social protection. That's things like state pensions and welfare benefits. Then you've got the other big ones, health and education. The rest covers, everything else. Defense, police, the whole shebang. So we know the average value is over 15 grand. But here's where it gets really dramatic. Let's see what happens when we compare your share of that cost to what you'd have to shell out for these same critical services on your own, in the private market. Let's start with healthcare. Your average annual tax contribution to the NHS is just under £3,000. But if you had a single serious medical emergency and had to pay for it privately, you'd be looking at a bill of over £100,000, easily. The system, that collective pool, is what stands between you and total financial disaster. And it's the exact same story with social care. Your bit through tax is about £440 a year, but the cost for a private nursing home? A staggering £54,000 every single year. Suddenly, that tax bill starts to look a lot like an incredible insurance policy. Okay, so that annual view is already pretty powerful, but what happens when you zoom out? Way out. Let's run a financial test over a 60-year lifetime. This is where the true scale of this safety net really becomes, well, crystal clear. All right, now to do this right, we need to quickly get our heads around a term economists use, income quintiles. It sounds complicated, but it's not really. Just imagine you line up every single household in the UK from the lowest income to the very highest. Now just slice that line into 5 equal groups of 20%. That's it. It just lets us compare different income groups fairly. And here is the jaw-dropping punchline. For households in the bottom 60% of incomes, that's 3 out of every 5 households in the country, the system provides a net benefit of £1.3 million over a lifetime. Let me say that again. They get £1.3 million more in services than they ever pay in taxes. Now, have a look at this breakdown. It tells an even clearer story. Those first 3 quintiles, the bottom 60% of us, are all huge net beneficiaries, each gaining that $1.3 million in value. And get this, even the 4th quintile, the next 20% up, comes out ahead by nearly £1 million. It's only when you get to the top 20% of earners that households start to pay in more than they get back in direct services. So that raises a pretty massive question, doesn't it? If 80% of the population gets more out than they put in over their lives, who on earth is making up the difference? Well, let's take a closer look at that top 20%. This chart just lays it out in the starkest terms possible. A household in the poorest 20% might contribute about £500,000 in tax over a lifetime. The household that perfectly breaks even, they pay in about $2.3 million. But then look at the richest 4%. They contribute an estimated £8 million. The entire system is overwhelmingly funded by a tiny group right at the very top. But even inside that top 20%, it's not a simple story.
When you break it down even further, you can see that folks in the lower half of this top group are often still getting more back than they pay in, or are only just breaking even. The real heavy lifting, funding the whole system stuff, that comes from those at the very, very top of the income scale.
So here's the crucial takeaway. A UK household doesn't actually become a net lifetime contributor, meaning they pay in more than they get out, until they're in the top 12% of all earners. For the other 88% of the country, the tax system is, financially speaking, the best deal they will ever get. Okay, so let's bring all of this together. What does this lifetime test and this funding breakdown actually tell us? What's the big idea that makes this whole thing work? Honestly, it's best summed up by this simple phrase. It's a compulsory, universal insurance policy. It's not just a burden. It's a system we all have to pay into, by law, so that when any one of us gets hit by a catastrophe, a health crisis, losing a job, or just getting old, that massive pool of money is there to catch us. So, what are the key takeaways here? 3 simple things. First, it's much more useful to think of tax as a high-value subscription, not just a burden. Second, for the huge majority of people, 88% of us, it provides a multi-million-pound safety net for life. And third, the stability of this whole system rests on the shoulders of the very highest earners. And that leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. We've seen exactly how this system is built. It depends on the contributions of a few to support the many. So the critical question for all of us for the future is, what happens if that delicate balance ever begins to shift?